Hello and welcome to Legal Connect Group Presents. This event is hosted by Alumni Relation and Constituent Engagement, the Green Center, and the Legal Connect Group, the newest industry group on the Meliora Collective. The Meliora Collective is the university's platform for connecting, networking, mentorship, and career exploration. This event is also hosted by the Pre-Law Society. The University of Rochester Pre-Law Society was established for the purpose of providing undergraduate students with the opportunity to learn about law school and its associated admission process. In addition, the University of Rochester Pre-Law Society aims to encourage undergraduates to learn more about legal processes and professions. My name is Evan Gamba, and I'm the secretary for this group. We are thrilled to have this diverse panel of accomplished alumni with us today for this engaging conversation. I will now introduce the president of our Pre-Law Society, Frederick Liu. He will be our moderator today.
Yeah, thank you, Evan. Welcome everybody. My name is Fred. As I said, I'm the current president for Pre-Law Society. I'm in class of 2023. I'm senior, about to graduate. And then the format of this event will be we'll be having around 35 minutes of discussion with the panelists up here. And then at 1:40, we'll be turning into Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to ask during that session. So to start off, we will have the panelists each introduce yourself, what type of law you practice, what you study, in the University of Rochester, and then some fun facts about yourself. So we'll start with Jeremy.
Sure. Thanks, Fred. Jeremy Kriegel, class of 1992 in mechanical engineering from Rochester, and I received my law degree from Washington University in St. Louis. I am a patent attorney practicing in Chicago as a partner at Marshall Gerstein Boren. And fun fact about myself is I tend to chase my 3 kids around the country. I got 2 in college and 1 still in high school.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Fred and Evan, for hosting us, and Michelle for putting this together. My name is Erin. I am Gibson Allen. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I graduated from the U of R with Jeremy, going back in 1992. I started out with a degree in psychology, and then moved and picked up a second degree in political science, and then went on to graduate from Pitt Law. And I work at a boutique firm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have institutional clients in the meds and ed space, but perhaps the client that I do the most work for and have most interesting experiences with is in the supermarket industry, which is more interesting than you might think. I'm excited for this group. Before we go on, I just want to say we're developing an online presence and encouraging people to sign up on the Meliora Collective, and through Michelle, we're really looking forward to doing programs like this in person and also remotely. So I encourage all of you who haven't to go on to the Meliora Collective and sign up to be involved in more events like this. Fun fact, I have 2 adult children, one in college, one just graduated, and like Jeremy, I spend a lot of my time with my sons. How is Sam?
Hi, everybody. My name is Sam White. I am a political science graduate, class of 2003. I went to UB Law, a hop, skip, and a jump away down the thruway. And I currently work as a public defender in Buffalo City Court. Fun fact about me, I guess, I'm just one of those people who's kind of everywhere, and I've got a finger in just about everything, and I love to agitate and get good results.
My name is Mark Zaid. Somehow I have reached that point in participating in Mill Weekend where I'm the oldest on the panel. I'm not quite sure how that has happened. Class at 89, I was history poli-sci major. I went to law school in Albany, not too far, 3.5 hours. You can put Nick Tahoe's garbage plates in your trunk and drive 3.5 hours and they survive. So don't worry about that. I'm down in DC. I have my own practice. I have for 30 years. I do national security work mostly. I can expound on that. I'm not quite sure if this would be a fun fact, but it is an informative fact. A lot of what I do in my law practice started here at the U of R, either as my history honors paper my senior year on the Kennedy assassination. So you can ask, well, how am I handling Kennedy assassination cases? But I am. And then a very not fun fact, because it was quite sad. Two of my classmates died on Pan Am Flight 103 in 1988. And I ended up filing the first civil lawsuit against Libya for the families. So that very much started my career path as well. And, we have some nice memorials around the campus I can share with you if you don't know where they are.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and thank you all the panelists for introducing yourself and give your interesting stories. So the second question I have is, how do you use your education here, in terms of your position right now? How applicable it is. So we'll start with maybe Mark this time. We'll go all the way down.
Look, I mean, you can't be beat. And look, I knew I was gonna go to law school when I started at the U of R. So that made it a lot easier. And quite frankly, you can, for those that are, who is a student here? Who's a lawyer here? Right, awesome. So the kids, that's what I want to be.
Say that I.
And understand sort of what Erin's saying, we formed this to, one, help the students. So if you want guidance, for sure, which is why we do it with the Free Law Society, but to be connected with our fellow peer and alumni who are lawyers, since we do not have a law school, and so there's no legal alumni association. So there's very twofold objective there. But you can major in anything, quite frankly, and go to law school. So in fact, I started out to be computer science, which in 1985 was like a big deal because we didn't know what computers really were yet. But I had to take calculus and I hated it with a passion. So I said, forget that. And I switched back to what I really loved, which was history, poli-sci. I use, especially both degrees. I mean, look, I'm in DC, so clearly political science, but my history degree in particular, which I'm on the alumni council here for history department, I use all the time. I mean, so much of the work that I do is historically based, and I use what I learned here to expound on and practice in DC. My practice is a very atypical practice. I represent senior government officials, sue the US government, sue foreign governments. It's very much a niche, and I will say it is one that I built up on my own. And I was no special candidate or anything that anyone else can't do the same thing. Which, so if there's something that you want to do, whatever it is, you want to be an expert on mummy law or something, I don't know if that exists, but probably you could create it, absolutely, and you can create it with the background you learned here at the U of R. I don't know if there are any mummy courses, but.
That's another.
So, in terms of how I use my U of R education, the biggest thing that I came out of U of R, the biggest thing I came out of U of R learning was how to learn. So, I mean, I was geared up and ready to go for law school after. In terms of the experience that I had studying political science, I learned about community organizing. I learned about protesting. My first protest was here at U of R. And since then, it has manifested, and I've been able to use the resources that University of Rochester gave me to make real changes in my community.
That was a thoughtful answer. I'm also gonna go a little bit of a left turn and not talk about what I learned necessarily academically at the U of R, but we'll talk about what I didn't really realize I was learning outside of the classroom, which has helped me in my legal career, which is leadership skills, and didn't necessarily think would be relevant for my ongoing professional life, but I was president of my sorority, which at the time was important to me. And I wouldn't say I was necessarily the world's best president, right? But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what was effective and frankly, what was ineffective. And kind of thought that chapter of my life was over, but I now find myself chair of a board of a nonprofit board that is in the domestic violence space, and I love it. And the leadership skills that I developed to be able to hold this role started back in college at the U of R. with my successes as well as failures. And I can find a direct thread from that opportunity to opportunities that I took in law school, to opportunities that I took in my early career, other initiatives that I've worked on, and the lessons that I've learned, I still think about all the time. So I would encourage you, whatever group you're in, whatever student organization you're in, to take a leadership role and to get out front and test yourself and learn something about yourself. And if you go into the law, what I will say is that lawyers have a unique skill to be able to draft bylaws, read bylaws, run a meeting, think procedurally. And it's really helpful to find those purposes that you care about when you're in college. Because, you know, like Sam, it probably is something that will follow you the rest of your life without you realizing it. If you can take your leadership, your organizational skills, and then your skills as a lawyer, and apply those in other areas, that can be a really helpful way to move your career forward. So I would say my U of R experience through some leadership opportunities.
And my experience at University of Rochester in mechanical engineering has definitely followed me through my career. I feel like I wear two hats as a patent attorney. One of the hats is a mechanical engineer, just trying to understand my clients' inventions. Having an engineering degree has definitely helped, I think, build a bridge between my clients and the world of law. Most of my clients are engineers, so the legal world is a bit daunting and intimidating to them at times, and navigating their way through the US Patent and Trademark Office. So I've definitely leaned on my experience in engineering, all except for the differential equations course, which was my third semester of calculus. So I'm with you on that one, Mark. But the other track that I pursued at Rochester was a management studies certificate, which I believe they still have. It was essentially a business minor, and those skills also really come in handy in the practice of law, because it is running a business when you are a partner at a law firm, and understanding the business aspects of that service industry are very important. And so I rely on the courses I took in economics and statistics and business law, and many of the classes that I took in that concentration. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you everybody for your really thoughtful answers. I think those are really helpful for anybody who are current students and probably practicing professionals. So when I was young, I usually watch these, legal series and talk about, someone has a war story, right? So if you don't mind, we'll go one by one, like sharing your war story while you're practicing law, no matter what type of law that you're in. So we'll start with Jeremy again.
Okay, I brought props for this. My war story goes back to my third year of practice. It was 1998. And one of the things I like about practicing intellectual property law is you get physical exhibits, a lot of them. And sometimes the physical exhibits take some interesting left turns. So we had a client that was named at the time Bammers, and their first name was named Bambino, and they received a quite nasty cease and desist letter from the Babe Ruth estate, and realized they weren't going to be able to continue as Bambino, so they changed their name to Bammers. But there was also a company that was very successful in the late 90s called Ty, and Ty had a product called the Beanie Babies. And the Beanie Babies were very successful. They were flying off the shelves. They were very hard to find Beanie Babies, and some of them were on the secondary market selling for tens of thousands of dollars, believe it or not. Beanie Babies had an exclusive agreement with McDonald's where there were miniature Beanie Babies sold in Happy Meals. Also in 1998, there was a bit of a home run derby between Sammy Sosa of the Chicago Cubs and Mark McGwire of the St. Louis Cardinals. And you might say this is a little like the Aaron Judge home run pursuit now on steroids, quite literally, for anyone who can remember that far back. And our client saw a niche, and they came out with a teddy bear, that was the Sammy Sosa bear, and they came out with another teddy bear called the Mark McGuire bear, and they did quite well. And they got the attention of Tide, who filed a lawsuit in federal court in Chicago for copyright infringement and trade dress infringement and a number of other intellectual property faux pas. And the case was going quite well for us. The judge did not think that our client's teddy bears looked all that much like the Beanie Baby bear. And the attorneys that I was working with decided to take this case all the way to trial. And just about on the eve of trial, at the pinnacle of this home run derby, the president of the United States, Bill Clinton, came to a Cubs game and went into the locker room after the game and met Sammy Sosa, who was at the front of this home run derby race. And he went up to Sammy Sosa and they met, and Sammy Sosa was so happy to see the president. He gave them his Gammer teddy bear. And President Clinton took one look at it and said, "A Beanie Baby." And so my war story is that the president of the United States tanked our case, and he saw that I'm saying.
No, thank you, Jeremy.
That's a really great story. I'm not sure I can beat that. I'm gonna try to share two stories that I said in my opening remarks that I do a lot of work for a regional supermarket chain, and two war stories that show you how that can be kind of an interesting, more interesting than you might think. The client has a pharmacy, a chain pharmacy, and a lot of you have probably heard in headlines about America's struggle with the opioid epidemic, which is tragic case in which countless Americans are losing their lives from overdose. And as will happen, people try to address that problem through many ways. One of ways is through the legal system. And our federal government has what is called the Controlled Substance Act, which regulates drugs, pharmaceuticals, from the point of manufacture to distribution, to dispensing, and including in there a triangulation of prescription. So you can't manufacture, dispense, distribute, or prescribe a controlled substance unless you're regulated by the federal government. And then there's a whole another layer of regulation at the state level. And there were lawsuits brought all across the country, literally thousands, suing every entity along that chain, from the manufacturers down to the pharmacies for being a cause of the opioid epidemic. And so there were thousands of these cases filed, and the federal court in its wisdom has a way of consolidating these cases and putting them in a big, I looked at it as a big bingo bin, pulling out lucky defendants and plaintiffs who get to go first in what they call a bellwether trial, which the federal court thinks, well, we'll have this trial and it will set the tone for settlement discussions going forward for all these other cases. And so my client got the lucky pull out of the bingo bin. So we got to go to court. Of course, you would think that it'll settle on the eve of trial one way or the other. It did not. So at the end of 2021, I got to go to participate in the trial. It was not a trial counsel, to be clear, but I was one of the supporting lawyers. We lived in a hotel in Cleveland. We were there for 5 weeks nonstop, around the clock, lots of resources. My client ended up settling at the last minute, but it was fascinating because the work is in an intersection of public policy and the law and battling it out. The plaintiffs in this case were 2 counties in the state of Ohio, which is sort of an unusual way to think about a plaintiff. They were 2 counties and the defendants. We were the first retail chain pharmacies. So you could ask yourself whether you think retail pharmacies have a place of accountability. The opioid epidemic, I argue vociferously that they did not, but it was a really interesting case and some good public policy. Another war story, and I'll keep this one quick. In the middle of the pandemic, our crew had a notice to strike for a warehouse that if the truckers couldn't get through for one of their warehouses during the pandemic, foods and toilet and grocery products wouldn't be able to get through. One of my colleagues at my firm was on the labor negotiation team she needed boots on the ground, so I had to go into the state where the strike was about to happen and work with local police departments to make sure that the striking workers, they have a First Amendment right to be able to picket their employer. But we also, as a business, have a need and a right to get the food delivered to our stores despite the strike. So I had to go to all the neighboring police departments and alert them that there may be a strike tomorrow morning. And we were gonna allow these picketers to picket, but here's where we needed them kept, and we needed these roadways kept open so that we could balance their First Amendment rights with our right to make sure the products got through. So really interesting work working for a supermarket. So those are two of my war stories.
So Jeremy, I actually have a retirement plan that is solely based on Thai Beanie Babies. As a public defender, my war story is very different. When I first started out, we would have as many as 350 clients that were taken on in a 4-week period. And during my first intake in 2019, I met a woman. It was the end of the arraignment day. So I'd probably processed between 25 and 35 prior arraignments. She was one of the last ones. And there was nothing about her that was special, let's put it that way. You know, she was wearing maybe a hoodie and some jeans, and she was in on a pettit larceny of 155.25. She had stolen some hygiene supplies from either a pharmacy or a grocery store. You know, maybe $50-$60 worth of Dove type of stuff, right? But she seemed a little skittish, a little flighty. And the judge at that point had the ability to place bail on this case, but decided not to. However, he wanted her to get linkage with our courts program for an evaluation for chemical dependency, alcohol, drugs, etc. And I could tell she just seemed a little flighty. I had one of my coworkers stay in the last arraignment or two, and I went with her to the courts program. And you know, it's not a big trip, it's an elevator ride down 2 floors, and there was a long line at that point. So I sat at a table in the hallway with her and we began talking. And in just a few minutes of just gentle conversation with this woman, she opened up so much to me. And I came to learn that she was actually being trafficked. She was being forced to prostitute and steal, and her trafficker demanded that she and other girls go and do this type of stuff. She also told me that she had a college degree, and he had actually gotten her strung out on heroin. And she felt like she couldn't leave. She had a child who was still at the location, etc. So inside of just a few minutes, I found myself talking to her and explaining, hey, I'm texting on my cell phone, but it's not because I'm not listening to you, it's because I'm trying to get help for you. Lo and behold, I'm in contact with advocates within our court system. Our human trafficking court advocate was able to come out and meet with her. We had set her up. We sat her down. We set her up with linkage to the Erie County Medical Center for a detox. She didn't go. Well, I didn't know what to make of it. I kept calling. A couple days later, she shows up on her own. She made her escape out. She went through the detox. She went through a 30-day program to get off the drugs. And the next call that I received from her was right at the beginning of COVID. She was just being released. And I ended up breaking all the rules at that, for being honest. I ended up driving the woman from Buffalo, where she was released to from the train station, all the way down to Olean, where she had a friend who was willing to let her stay. Couple of years later, she is a productive member of society. She is functional again. She was able to get off the drugs and back onto her mental health medication. And that was the first big accomplishment that I had as a public defender. And that's guided how I treat all of the people that I deal with, because it's in public defense, it's really easy to be overwhelmed by the numbers and to lose the humanity. But if you see the humanity in each person, you can change lives.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That's an amazing story, son. The human aspects of law practice can be very important and very fulfilling, especially because we are not trained on how to deal with situations like that. I will bring in another president into this, and I'll tie it to Mel Weekend, because our last Mel Weekend, when we were all here 3 years ago in 2019, was my 30th reunion. And in the midst of being up here, I was dealing with representing the primary whistleblower against President Trump, whose complaint led to his first impeachment. And it was a pretty trying time as we were going back and forth to panels and events and my class dinner and everything. I'm giving George Stephanopoulos information as to what he could use for ABC This Week on Sunday morning, and I'm talking to Congressman Devin Nunes, who was the Republican ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee, who was actually a friend of mine from a bunch of other cases, and feeding him information on both sides, because it was for me, a nonpartisan exercise. But it was pretty wild in dealing with the President of the United States. He didn't actually sink my case. He called me a scumbag. I thought that was kind of interesting. I got that was the first time somebody had called me that. It was the first time President of the United States, I think, had called me that. And that I should be sued for treason, which for the non-lawyers doesn't exist. But was still pretty wild. You know, our objective was not dealing with the impeachment aspect. That was the political side of things. I represent a lot of national security whistleblowers, so we were just trying to protect the whistleblower to get through, and in that case, it was incredibly successful. But no good deed goes unpunished, because then my malpractice insurance carrier, Hanover, decided to drop me as a insured client because of my representation of the whistleblower, which I thought was pretty sleazy on its behalf. And it took me a few times of reading the letter, trying to figure out, why are you dropping me? Because I have no malpractice cases against me at least at that point. Somebody filed one politically against me, which went nowhere. But it was pretty wild. They even got the general counsel on the phone trying to say, what are you guys doing? But no, they still dropped me because apparently they didn't like the publicity, even though it wasn't tied to them. So I made sure the New York Times did a really big story on the fact that they dropped me as a client. That was like on page 3 of the New York Times. Thank you, Maggie Haberman, and anyone who follows President Trump cases and storylines. Maggie is one of the top people who's been following him for many, many years. So it made for a really interesting Mel Weekend, as all my classmates were coming up to me going, what the hell, why are you here? We didn't think you would be here. And I'm like, this is vacation. Are you kidding me? I want out of DC right now. No more death threats. I didn't get any death threats, I think, while I was up here, at least at Mel Weekend. So was it emotionally successful and rewarding as Sam's case? But it was definitely one hell of a war story. That's for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for the panelists. Those are truly inspiring stories. I hopefully won't have one more story until 4 years after that. But the next question we have is for current students for studying U of R, the undergrads. So they're wondering, when you're practicing law, right? There's different types of law. There's like patent, criminal, corporate, like all those sorts. Does your major, for undergraduate majors choice matter in a sense, when they, want to go into a specific type of law in the future? We'll start with Mark, down there.
Yeah, I mean, like I said in the beginning, I don't think so. I mean, I think one, you should just take frankly what you want. Now there are courses and coursework that is helpful for law school. Anything with writing for sure is incredibly helpful. Anything with a lot of reading, anything that was a thought process. But most of what we, at least from my vantage point, what we learn in law school about having to be a lawyer, you really are taught in law school. So if you have a particular area that interests you and you can take coursework on that, yeah, absolutely. If you want to go into medicine and medical aspects of law, and you want to take science classes and nursing classes and things like that, that's going to absolutely help you. But I don't think you have to worry about too much because law school is somewhat independent from what you would have done in college. You really will learn, I think, most of it once you're in school and after, especially like for patent law, which Jeremy can tell you about, because that's one of the hardest areas, quite frankly, I think, out there.
I would say that use this time at U of R to develop your soft skills for what it is you'd like to do, whichever area you'd like to practice in. For me, I use the cluster that I did in sociology a lot. The political science side of it, I use more in my community work and in my advocacy work. But I agree with Mark. It really is independent. Law school is independent of undergraduate, unless you're doing something technical like Jeremy, and engineering might help if you want to do patents.
I agree with all of that. I think you should follow what you're interested in. As interested as I may have been in what Jeremy studied, I don't have the capacity for it. So you got to follow what you know. But I will add a little vignette to get some color behind that. So I love joining different legal associations and reading all the materials that come through on the mail in my mail. County Bar Association. I'm a member of the American Bar Association. I love their antitrust law section because I do a lot of work in antitrust law, and the magazines come, read their stuff online, and I get really excited. And my husband will know I got an issue recently, and I was really excited because I pointed to show him, he's also a lawyer, and I said, I know, I'm pretty sure it's the American Bar Association. I know this woman. I know she's a speaker in legal and technology, but I went to college with her. And she's back there in the second to last row. So I just, like, if I were her, she has a law degree, Nikki, hi. Right, and and I thought, well, I know she speaks on this, but I'm so proud of her because she's a national voice in this space. And that's really, really cool. I'm proud that I know her and she speaks on that. So, if you're interested in technology, but you're also interested in law, there's always an intersection in law and whatever it is you are personally interested in. So I would just encourage you to follow that which you are sincerely interested in, and then find ways to overlay your legal degree with that.
I couldn't agree more, and I would say that whatever area of practice you think you may want to practice when you start law school may change 10 times while you're in law school. Even though I went to undergrad and law school knowing I wanted to be a patent attorney, I didn't realize until I got to law school that employment law happened to be a very fascinating field of law, and took several courses in employment law. And as I sort of charted out my career path and started submitting resumes to law firms, employment litigation was one area that I very much entertained. So I would say your major should not be so focused as trying to align it with an area of law that you might practice. I think it's good to have a vision. I think it's a long road to chart your path through both undergrad and law school. So it's good to have at least something in mind and be working toward that goal. And I think selecting a major can help you do that. But I also think you want to have enough diversity in your coursework that you can pivot, because might change unexpectedly.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think those are very helpful for students who are, current sophomores or freshmen trying to declare their major and want to go to law school. Because for me, I'm into IP law, so it's sort of like, still trying to figure everything out. So our next question is, how did you use your UART network, advancing your career, so to say? And we will start with Jeremy.
So my UR connection was back from my hometown. I grew up in the Detroit area. And as it turned out, the head of the patent department at Ford Motor Company, Roger May, was a U of R graduate. And did some networking and got an introduction to Mr. May, who had a very good relationship with a patent firm in Southfield, Michigan, a Detroit suburb. And allowed me to get an opportunity to clerk there after my junior year of engineering school. So I was still a U of R undergrad student, but able to have some real on the ground work experience in intellectual property law, which really cemented my passion for the field. And it was very much directly tied to a U of R connection.
So I'll answer that question a little bit differently. I'm a big proponent of building professional networks, and I'm a big proponent of building diverse professional networks. And I think there's a misunderstanding around what it means to have a network. And I think when you first start out, you think of networks as very transactional. I'm gonna go to this event and I'm gonna exchange cards, and that person is gonna help me do this, and that will be good for me. But what I found is that networks are more complicated than that, and networking is really more about the unfortunate reality that I think we all sort of learn as we become lawyers. When you're an undergrad, you tend to think, I'll go to law school, I'll graduate, I'll get a job, and then I'm good. Right? And it's just not the case. You go to law school, you graduate, you get a job, and then everything changes, and then something's different, your industry changes. Something changes and you've got to do the next thing. You got to get better, you've got to pivot. Something changes and you're always learning. And a lot of the data will show that to have that network to go to and have lunch with someone and say, hey, Nikki, my firm, I just started my own firm, but everyone's using printer, what do I do? And she can help you talk through these issues, right? So to have a diverse network, I've really enjoyed, again, through my volunteering in the city, meeting other people who are not lawyers. Who work in different areas, people who are in the professional development space, people who are in the financial industry, people who run businesses, just all sorts of diverse people, so I can run ideas by them, and it's a give and take. Maybe I can help them, look for ways to help them, and maybe they can help me with ideas more than like a transactional network. So bringing it down to the U of R specifically, how has that helped me? I am the co-leader of the Pittsburgh alumni chapter, and I love that practice, and I've held events and I've really enjoyed just meeting other U of R grads, right? Because people who go to here, I think it's fair to say, are bright, smart, curious, often funny people. And I just enjoy that experience for its own sake. My co-leader, Mark Felix, at Pittsburgh, has become a personal friend, and his wife, Nancy. And it's just a valuable experience to continue to grow a network for its own sake. So I would encourage you all, when you graduate, wherever you go, to find your city and get involved in that network and show up to those events. And don't think of it as like, oh, well, this will help me do this, but just, it'll make you a more enriched person. And come back to campus and stay engaged, because this is the place where you'll find smart, engaging people.
Yeah, some of them.
Very well said.
Oh, thank you.
I can't even follow that. Okay, so here's the fact of the matter. When I graduated and when I went to law school and graduated law school and I was just starting to practice as an attorney, I had no idea how to network, what networking was about, why I should even be involved, etc., etc., etc. But I was getting flyers. I was getting flyers in the mail because U of R will not let up. Okay? And I went to the event, and then I went to another, and it was really cool getting into like the mansion in Buffalo. It's like one of the ritziest like private clubs, and man, they had good hors d'oeuvres and good liquor too. I'm not even gonna front, but you know, I did exactly like you said, I met people from all different backgrounds and all different fields who knew about all different things. And then I also made connections in my own profession, and I developed relationships with mentors that have been mentors now for almost 2 decades. And so the value of participating in your alumni network and coming back to events like this and participating in Meliora Weekend is that you're going to grow personally, you're gonna grow that network, and while you may not understand how it works as a new graduate, there's value to it, so put yourself out there and do it.
Yeah, I agree with everything there. I have always remained involved with U of R. I've never stopped, I guess, from having left. So I'm the chair of the George Eastman Circle in DC. I'm on the National Library Council for the U of R and a bunch of other things. And DC, we're the 3rd largest region, I think, if I remember correctly. You got obviously up here, New York City, then us. So we have about 5,000 alums. And we're constantly doing events, and that type of networking is incredible, whether it's just not necessarily for career, but you know, as Aaron was saying, enriching your life of meeting people. I mean, I still look back to things that I did here. I studied in London, working for the British Parliament for a semester. That 30, almost 40 years later is really still with me and incredibly meaningful. And meeting alums and including new alums, because the 4 of us have started to get to know one another, and we didn't know each other. I don't think anybody knew the other, right, beforehand, which was the purpose of forming this in the first place. Again, to interact with you as students and interact with us as peers. You never know when you're going to need someone. We constantly post on message boards like, hey, I need a lawyer in such and such county. Does anybody know anything? Or anyone to refer, and it's all about that connectivity. Or for the students, I mean, in many ways, things are a lot easier for you guys because of technology. In some ways, maybe it's a little bit even harder because of folks leaning towards that, and the interactions aren't as much. But you know, ask for just to meet for coffee, right? It's not about, hey, can I meet for you to see if you have an opening at your law firm? No, it's about just meet to get to know us, and then see where that interaction can go. Because if it's not something I can never hire anybody. I have a very small firm. We're in a real niche, but I know so many people, and I can usually try and place someone, at least another introduction. And that's what networking is really all about. Hey, and I'll finish with when I was in London for the British government on my U of R program. I got to hang out with Art Garfunkel. It was all because Simon and Garfunkel, I don't know, they're the young ones. Got to hang out with him because he went to high school with my mom, and I wrote a letter to where he was going to perform when I was in London. And I told my member of parliament that you watch, I'm going to get free concert tickets, which I did after I gave his mom, his brother, and his manager's wife a tour of Parliament. Floor seats, networking, all about networking.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So we're at 1:45, so we'll open up for Q&A questions. So if you guys have any questions, just please raise your hand, and Evan will be passing down my mic. Yes.
All right, thank you so much, Evan. So my question is a bit specific, and I would like to address it to Mr. Jeremy Kriegel, right? Sorry, mispronounced your name. So as a student here at the University of Rochester, as a senior, I've spoken to many students who are being entrepreneurial and who are trying to invent new things in the different fields, and the fields ranging from medicine to actually mechanical engineering. And the biggest sort of struggle that they all have is at some point when they do make some progress, especially after they participate in those business accelerators, they realize that they created something valuable, and they are filing a provisional patent application for their invention. But once that's done, and they usually consider it to be a simple step to sort of create more value to their startup, right? Once that's done, they are really confused and a bit desperate, because they realized that to proceed forward with that and to file an actual non-provisional patent application, that would require involvement of very expensive lawyers. So my question for you is, I keep talking to many of those people, so what would your advice be to them? Like, how, like, they don't have much financing, right? They don't have many resources. So what would the next step for them be once they filed all those PPAs, once they've done all that work, they already have background, but there's still this struggle of kind of making their idea into actual patent. So to make my question more specific, I guess, like, are there any cheaper ways of probably submitting non-provisional patent application yourself, probably? And yeah, I guess that's my general question for you. Thank you.
So my short answer would be going back to the very first thing you said, that these are students. One thing that the University of Rochester has is a technology transfer program. And so that would be a resource internally at the university that is set up to help fund and take to market to potential licensees technology coming out of the university. So I would say explore that aspect first, because they might have some channels, and if it's something that students have developed perhaps with a faculty member, that could also encourage the technology transfer program to get behind it more so than they might for an undergraduate based invention, but they might want to consider and get behind that too. But yes, you're right, it's definitely a daunting challenge after that provisional is filed to realize that now the real costs are going to come. It's possible to what we call prosecute a patent application pro se, where you represent yourself. But as the old adage goes, in just about all of our practice areas, the person who has themselves as a lawyer is not doing themselves a very good service. I think I'm actually the saying, but they have a fool for a client, I believe is the expression.
Thank you.
So this is open to everyone, but I was curious about if you went to law school straight after graduating, or if you took some time to gain work experience and looking back at hindsight, whether or not you would have made a different decision.
I'll just say real quick, I went straight through, the economy was tough when I was graduating, I had no idea what I was gonna do, so I went straight through to law school. But I have a son who's senior in college, and he wants to go to law school, and he's going straight through as well. And I'm not discouraging that, I think it's something you know you wanna do and you're really interested in, it's fine progression, others might. I don't think there's a wrong answer, I think if you wanna work for and get some experience under your belt, that's also very valuable. And if you have different experiences.
I definitely didn't want to get a job, so I went straight to law school.
Yeah, I went straight, my economy was Aaron and Jeremy's economy, and the stock market had crashed in '87, so everyone was going straight through, and we felt like I remember I felt like I was gonna be behind the 8 ball if I didn't go straight through. Thinking back, I think I have a different opinion. I was so burnt out from school. I loved law school, but my first year of law school, I partied more than I did my senior year of college, because I worked so much harder here my senior year than I did first year of law school. I think I would, looking back, I would have liked a little bit of time. And the average age, now this has changed from when we went, the average age was much older in law school when at least the 3 of us went. I don't know about 5 to 10 years after, it has started to go back down, where people are going straight through, but you can't beat having some additional experience of life in particular. So I think the answer is going to be, there is no right answer. It's going to be something specific to you to evaluate. Now, nowadays, I think it's probably maybe because of the pandemic, it's easier to get in, and not to necessarily get in, but get in and then defer for a year or two. The schools seem a lot more flexible, and that might not be a bad idea to do. If you feel like, you're secure, you're in school, but go out, either have some fun or travel, whatever, or work and get some life experience.
And I was K through JD as well.
Hi guys, thank you all for being here. My question's for Mark. You talked a little bit about being able to work in Parliament. I just was wondering what the process of that was, what your experience was, how you liked it, and how you got involved.
So the one thing I will recommend to everyone, study abroad. Pick a semester or a year, it doesn't matter where you go somewhere. That was the most phenomenal experience that I had, that is still so meaningful to me, and that I use. But the key thing is you'll meet if you go. Now, we have a lot of great programs through UVAR, but you can go through any school's programs. But there's a big difference between the school programs. And I remember being in London, look, I didn't have to learn another language for the most part. I didn't understand the Scots, usually when they spoke, at least until I had some more beers, then somehow I could understand them better. But there were a lot of American students who they just went over and they just hung out with Americans and they partied with Americans and just partied. The UVAR programs were work related. And we worked 4 days a week in Parliament and 1 day of classes. And I know I made sure that I traveled every weekend or went to museums, at least locally. Hung out with non-Americans as much as possible. Went to the Soviet Union for a week, which was pretty wild back in the day. I would not go back now. I think I'm on a hit list for a couple of the former republics actually, but it was such an experience. They still have the Parliament program. I thought it would be better going down to DC, working for a member of Congress. I love DC, except for traffic now. But you were one of 20 other interns, and you might have lunch with your member of Congress. And if they knew your name, you'd probably be lucky. I was the only person in my office with this member of Parliament. It was much more like a state system when I worked in the state legislature here. In Albany. It was the member of Parliament, me, and the staff assistant, and that was it. So I was doing all sorts of really wild stuff, besides meeting Art Garfunkel, but actually like working on South African issues, which was pretty wild in the late 1980s as apartheid was starting to collapse. Go to the study abroad office, which I think is still in this building, if I remember correctly. It's right down the hallway. It was so meaningful that actually we just came back from Mount Hope Cemetery because the woman who ran the program died, unfortunately, and is in the cemetery. But it's a great program.
That's a good question. If you had to do it all over again, would you go to law school? Everyone.
Absolutely.
I'll repeat the question just for prosperity. If you had it to do all over again, would you go to law school?
What's your answer? I think I would.
I don't know.
That's a good, honest answer. Look, I will say, if you can afford to go to law school, you're not going to go wrong with going to law school. The thought process that you learn at a law school will benefit you in almost every other field. Your partner may not be happy about it as you argue with them all the time and think you can outsmart them, which you usually can't. But it was a great education for sure. And I know as I'm having my own kids go through college and everything, I'm not as caught up nowadays on what school you go to, because it's what you make of it, whether it's undergrad or grad school. Albany's a regional law school, has a great history. But I think what I created my own practice, notwithstanding whatever Albany taught me, and I know enough lawyers from Harvard now that I'm not quite sure that made a difference. So how they practice either.
I'd say yes, but here's where I'll go full circle, that it's good to sit down with someone who's been to law school and had a career and ask them what they would do differently, to Nikki's question, because I love law school. I met some of the most interesting, fun people in a very, sort of dark time, because you're, in a classroom setting. It was hard. It was rigorously hard. It was academically challenged. But I really enjoyed the people, and I really enjoyed the profession, and I still do enjoy the people, right? I just inherently enjoy getting in a room full of lawyers, and I love lawyers. I love talking to them. I love hearing what they do. I love meeting people who do different things than I do. Would I have done my career personally differently? It's like one of those things, well, I wouldn't have learned everything I learned. I'm the person I am if I hadn't made the decisions I made. So that's not how life works, right? Where I would go back and say, oh, I wish I had done this differently. But I've done enough that I'd say, I think about this a little bit differently. So when people come to me and they ask me for career advice, I say, well, here's what I would think about, right? Here's what I would spend some time. What is right for you as a young person? I'm not going to tell you what to do because life's not that way. I know what worked or didn't work for me. But here's the questions that I would be asking if I were at your stage. And if you're thinking about going to law school, do you love school? Do you love studying? Do you love reading? Do you love politics? Do you love government? Do you love thinking about these things, right? And spend some time with that. Do you want to be in a library? Do you love books? Do you love writing? Do you love challenge? Can you be ready to push yourself? I would have those questions, but I wouldn't tell someone yes or no. And then I would do that throughout the entire scope of your career. It's just, your alumni, we're here for you and we have questions to make you think critically about your next step. Yeah, I love law school and no regrets.
I would do it again. I've definitely come across clients in the medical device field, in retail, in consumer products, where I could have definitely seen myself fitting in as an engineer among their technical teams. But what I find more fun is working with all of them and being able to just take a little piece of what I learned from each of them and representing them and being able to apply it in other industries. So I was very glad that I found this profession and would certainly endure law school again. I wasn't a huge fan of the Socratic method, but you got to get through it to get to the fun part.
So I'm gonna take a whack at explaining why my answer is, I don't know. I am a first generation college graduate. I am a first generation attorney. My mother drove a school bus, my father worked in a factory, and I am so severely in debt. And my passion is public interest, which doesn't pay a lot. So I will likely be struggling with student debt for at least the next decade. If I'm able to stay at the wages that I'm at, maybe I'll get forgiveness if we have the right type of administration in power at that time. It is scary to know that I'm paying for a house that doesn't exist, because that's the amount of debt that I'm in. My family didn't have the resources to take on loans and, provide me with the resources, to come to a university like this. Thank God I was able to get many scholarships here and federal aid, but as a person of color and as a first generation college graduate and first generation attorney, I am heavily bogged down by the responsibility of the large amount of debt I have.
We will take one last question, because we're running out of time. Anybody else has any questions?
Thank you all for coming.